Good evening, everyone. Happy Thursday. It's another beautiful day here in the Napa Valley. Thanks so much for joining us tonight. This is the last night of our Great Sustainable Seafood Tour virtual tasting series, but don't worry, you still have time to submit your recipes with Chef Todd for the recipe competition. So you've got a little bit of time on that. So hopefully this will give you some last minute ideas on perhaps what your recipe is going to be. But starting July 1, we're going to kick off our next virtual series with Thrill of the Grill, July 1st, just in time for 4th of July. I know I'm a hopeless griller. Michael, Chef Todd, we've got lots of great grillers at St. Superi, so I'm going to pick up some new tricks, and we'll have some guest speakers, so should be pretty exciting and get you all ready to impress your friends and family or those in your pod on July. And then, of course, followed up with Drink Like a Pro. All of us here at St. Superi know exactly how to drink like a pro. And we also do that in addition to making great wine so that it is fun to drink like a pro. So thanks for joining us. Let's rush out to the vineyard and go see Michael Garcia on this windy, beautiful, cool day here in the Napa Valley and hear what's going on. Looks pretty breezy out there, Michael, and we got kind of chilly last night, didn't it?
It did, yeah. It's breezy now, and it was down close to 32 degrees this morning, last night at about 5:30 a.m. So luckily we didn't get too cold, but it was pretty close for the middle of June.
That's pretty unusual, but you know, it beats the heat, blazing heat and lots of wind.
Definitely, it definitely does.
Well, what's happening out in the vineyard this week?
Well, we got a lot going on. I think we talked before about our wires and shoot positioning. So we've been raising wires to keep our canopies vertical. So we're getting close to done with the first pass in that regard. We're continuing to plant parcel 11. There we go on that video right there. That's an example of our wire lifting, and we'll tuck the shoots within the wires as we lift them. We keep our canopies vertical, keep the fruit not too exposed, but exposed to enough light that we want. We allow our tractors to get down the rows, and on a windy day like this, we protect the shoots from wind. So that right there is an example of our wire lifting. It makes the vineyard look real nice too, and we're planting. And we're also starting to drop a little bit of fruit to set our crop the way we want to. So we have quite a bit going on.
Wow, you know, that crop thinning is pretty darn important to quality, but and I know you've got to go through several times, but it's also important for health of the clusters and the vine. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, definitely. So on this video, as you can see, we're separating the clusters, and this is Malbec. This is actually parcel 10D where I'm standing right now. And Malbec sets a heavy crop normally. It can set, well, most vines will set 2 clusters per shoot. Malbec can set 3 in a lot of cases. So we'll take it down to 1 or 2, depending on the crop we want. Depending on the canopy size. We want to separate the clusters and make sure they're not touching each other. We don't want them to size up and be all bunched together because that'll set them at risk for bunch rot and other disease issues down the line.
Well, it looks like with this nice moderate weather and great breeze, you don't have a lot of disease pressure, that's for sure. It's pretty darn dry right now. And tonight we're tasting the Elu, or red Bordeaux varietal blend that comes from both Dollarhide and Rutherford, as well as the Rutherford Merlot, 2 of my favorite red wines to go with seafood, and just delicious. I think we've got the 16 Merlot and the 15 Elu. Do let us know if you're tasting a different vintage. But Michael, you want to talk a little bit about growing those varietals at both locations, because you're growing Cabernet Sauvignon and Petit Verdot at both locations, Malbec just at Dollarhide, and the Merlot and the Cabernet Franc just in Rutherford, and kind of what you're looking at as far as the challenges and the impact of the different sites.
Yeah, so both sites are quite different. You know, they have certain similarities, but they're different in large sense because of the soil. So the soils in Rutherford, to start, since we're so close to the Napa River, are derived from alluvial flows and fluvial kind of deposits. And that makes the soils, I wouldn't say heavy, but they're slightly higher in organic matter. They hold a little bit more water. And our rootstock selection is especially indicative of that. So in Rutherford, we have a lot of vines planted on 10114, which is a rootstock that's Riparian, Vitis riparia based. And the name kind of tells it all. So riparia is, it comes from the riparian areas. It's a wild grape. And you can see on the map there, that's our parcel map, and the dark green in the top right corner is the Napa River. And so this riparia has shallow rooted, it takes up a lot of water, but its water needs are, it kind of needs a little bit more water in some cases. We can't stress it with drought as much. And it's quite contrasting to Dollarhide, where on these hillsides, like I'm standing, we are on a kind of fractured shale type soil, and it drains a lot better. And so it won't hold on to the water. And a lot of the rootstocks we use out here are rupestris based. And rupestris is another wild grape, yet it kind of comes from the hot or drier areas in the southwest of the Americas. And its roots are super deep rooted. So on these hillsides, you know, it's still kind of, we can use water in certain ways, but these vines will search for water more so than the riparia based rootstocks in Rutherford. And so the rootstock based on and you know, kind of in conjunction with the soil while growing the same varieties keeps these two sites really different in how we manage them.
Yeah, and also, you know, the elevation is so different. You know, in Rutherford, we've got all those aquifers running below the vineyard, and that soil that holds the moisture, you know, like you said. And then at Dollarhide, we've got this well-drained soil that and this high elevation without a lot of groundwater. So really super different from a water in the soil to start with perspective. And Robert Kaplan's asking, how is the water situation out there right now at Dollarhide? Of course, all that water is recaptured rainwater in the lakes that we have, or captured rainwater.
Yeah, it's you know, it's low. It's a drought year. We have some water. We weren't able to collect much this year. We weren't able to capture much just because of the low rainfall. But we are, you can see the lake behind me. It's quite low, but we're trying to conserve it and be very judicious in our water allocation. So we're confident that we have enough to have a very successful year. So.
Yeah, and you know, it is interesting. It's good that we've been practicing our Napa Green practices for quite a while now, since 2006 or 8 that we got the certification in Rutherford. We've been intentionally managing our water very closely. And so, you know, 13 years of extra focus on that has definitely prepared us for yet another drought year. But thanks for the update from the vineyard. Let's jump over to Michael Scholes there at the winery and listen to what you've got to tell us about the differences between these two wines and kind of how you make them, you know, starting with this 2016 Rutherford Merlot, which is just delicious. I love this wine. So Michael?
Yeah, the Merlot is a very nice wine. This 2016 is a very nice vintage. So yeah, really presents very well. It's a terrific wine. The Merlot, of course, is grown on the Rutherford Estate that Michael was talking about a second ago. And Merlot grows very, very well here. In fact, we grow all of our Merlot on this property. I'm in Rutherford right now, and we grow all of our Merlot on this property because it does such a good job in this location. And, you know, varietals, you know, some locations do a better job than some varietals, and other locations better with others. But Merlot really works well here in Rutherford. So we'll be talking a bit about the 2016 Merlot here today. And then, of course, the Elu is a blend off of the two properties. So Well, we have a lot of vineyard designates, which are either from one or the other property, the Dollarhide Ranch or the Rutherford Estate. The Elu actually covers both properties, where we take a little bit from each for various reasons, depending on the variety there, Emma.
Yeah, well, they're both really delicious wines. And I know with this 2016 Rutherford Merlot, you did a lot of that barrel fermentation. I really get the heft and the mid-weight in the palate and that just beautiful texture that we get from that barrel fermentation. And I think you did a fair amount with the Elu as well. Do you want to talk a little bit about just that you do have a slight blend, I think, on that 16 Rutherford Merlot?
Yeah, we do. So, look, a lot of different components go into making all of these wines. And the Merlot, even though it is a Merlot, we still do incorporate a few other varietals for various reasons. And we incorporate different types of vinification techniques. So, a bit like you're talking about with the barrel fermentation. So, we incorporate that. This Merlot has 29% representation of that vinification, and the reason we do that is because that process generates great density, great center, great width and length, and a tremendous integration of oak and structure and tannin. So that's a good contributor. So it really does a good job as part of that. But we also have in the Merlot a little Cabernet, a little Cabernet Franc, a little Petit Verdot. So 6%, 4%, and 2% respectively. And so each of them contribute a little bit to the Merlot, for example. The Merlot tends to be a wine that's very centered, quite plump, quite round, and often a touch more gentle. And the Cabernet, on the other hand, is a little more bold, a little more robust. And Cabernet Franc also brings pretty good structure. And Petit Verdot is the boldest of all. That sort of presents the most structure, the most tannin and what have you. So we use a very small amount, being 2%. But all of them contribute to enhance what the Merlot can do on its own. But the wine's very much Merlot, being like 88% on this particular vintage we have. Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's really delicious, and it's definitely a go-to pairing wine for me. I like it with a lot of food, and particularly with salmon like we're having this evening. I think it's going to be just fantastic. And the Elu, you've been making Elu with Miso Roland since the 1992 vintage. Was the first vintage that you made together. And, it's always got a great length and density, but it's also got a freshness and elegance that I think really kind of carries well with fish. And you want to kind of comment to the style and your focus when you're making that? Because I know it's the best wine of the vintage from the two vineyards together. You want to comment on how you make those choices?
Yeah, so the vision for the wine has always been to be a big, dark, deep, and centered, yet sort of supple and elegant, with some nice charm through the finish and what have you. So it's almost like a crazy concept to have all of those in one, but that's what the vision is for the wine, what we've been trying to do for all of these years. And it's a really fun wine to make, actually, and particularly to blend. All of the components that go into them, whether they be Cabernet, Merlot, Cabernet Franc, whatever, they all are contributors of some facet or another. And so hence, that's why we can create a wine that has got great volume. It's quite round, it's quite structured, but it's quite supple all at the same time. So Cabernet is the core of the wine. It brings the frame, the structure, the bulk of what this wine becomes. But Merlot is significant in the blend, and Merlot brings great center, which allows you to balance the profile. Also brings a little more, slightly more gentleness to the tannin finish. Cabernet Franc's sort of a bit of a spice rack, but actually it's quite a structured wine. Now we put a little Malbec in it. It's quite soft. That brings great, it contributes good acidity. So that brings some more life to the wine, a little more vive, a little more freshness, as you mentioned, Emma. But then Petit Verdot, we bring that in typically in a smaller percentage. Again, it's structuring and what have you. But it's very interesting how all of the varietals work together to create the final, the sum of all, So that's what we have.
Well, kind of one of the fun things that I realized as we were going to start the sustainable seafood tour again this year is how much effort we put into optically sorting or hand sorting the fruit. And we discovered that there's a second similarity to sustainable seafood and sorting of fruit, but sorting of fish. And one of the things that we learned is that salmon are spawned in a specific river, and they go out in the ocean, they travel for thousands of miles, but they come back to the same location when they go to spawn again. They know exactly where they were. And well, as people, sometimes we interfere in that process for them in getting back to where they're trying to go. Perhaps we've built a dam, perhaps there's been a drought. And what we now have is a whoosh pass that will help bring the passage portal to bring the salmon back to their spawning grounds. And it's really quite an amazing fish passage that can shoot the salmon back up into their spawning grounds. You can see they'll swim up of their own through it, but then they get scanned just like the optical sorter. And if there's invasive species, they get directed by the whoosh to another area. And so we just have the salmon who've been spawned in that location and the fish that belong getting back to where they're supposed to be to spawn. So a little technology helping the seafood out, and it's fascinating because we've talked about farmed seafood and how the different farmers like Ora King salmon are selecting a certain breed and a certain brood stock of fish to continually perpetuate for their flavor. And many of you have had Copper River salmon, and that's one of the things that Copper River salmon has. Those same family of fish are going back out and coming back each year. And so there's a flavor profile associated with that location, just like we have a flavor profile associated with the wines. And we talk about the terroir that we've talked about, terroir versus terroir. So we thought this was just kind of a fun and really helpful invention that the Whoosh folks have kept, because it's going to keep that genetic line of salmon going and back up. So that was just kind of fun. Check it out on YouTube. But we thought it was a little bit of fun, as I think Todd, you've got some your river salmon today in the kitchen for the recipe. So shall we just pop over to you and then back to our guest speaker after we take a look at that salmon?
Absolutely. Sounds good. I don't know if this salmon went through the whoosh. I don't believe it did, but that's really a great piece of technology. And, think about our grapes with our optical sorter. You've all probably seen how picky we get with the grapes, and the camera will take so many pictures. So in order to do that for the salmon, to get them to where they need to be so that the population continues to thrive, it's a great bit of sustainability there. It's a little bit of getting involved with Mother Nature and everything, but anything that will help at this point, I think, is a great thing. So we've got fantastic salmon that will end up going back upstream to lay their eggs, and then eventually the whole cycle keeps going. So as far as the sustainable seafood, I mentioned farmed, raised, and aquaculture, and some of the great models that are out there, and I love those. Obviously, for the most part, and I try to remind everyone of this, my most sustainable product typically ends to be when it's in season, when it's running, and when it's local or wild caught, first and foremost. As long as it's caught in the right way, it's not dragged through nets across the bottom doing damage to the ocean floor or anything. Line caught a lot of times is the best way, but that's my first and foremost, most sustainable product that I want to support as much as possible. Copper River in Alaska happens to be very famous for the salmon that run through there. There's a lot of different varieties that run through Copper River. The salmon that I found close by in town here in Napa is a sockeye salmon. So the sockeye variety is a little bit more firm. It's a little bit darker. It's got a firmness to it. But as the salmon are going through the Copper River there, they're developing, after the long journey that they had, they've developed a lot of fat and a lot of content in there. So there's an incredible amount of flavor. But this one is actually very muscular. So it's very dense and kind of meaty. And so I thought this would be a great way to pair up with our red wine, just to show that fish can actually go with red wine. And so I never really shy away from it. A lot of it has to do with the cooking method or the fact that I might be using red wine in the preparation, or some of the ingredients are very heavy, very rich, and they kind of stand up to the body of the wine. So that's one of my approaches in doing so. So the salmon itself here, let me see if I can show you on the side. I set aside some nice fillets that are already boneless and skinless. So you can tell by the color of that, it doesn't, it's kind of a smaller, flatter fillet, but it's intense in flavor. And the sockeye has a nice density to it. So I'm going to use this as my sustainable seafood today to pair up to go with our Merlot in particular. It could also go with our Elu because it's so well blended and it's got nice complexities to it. But I think the Merlot in most cases is a great red wine to go with most seafood. And that's kind of an easy go-to that should work pretty well. In order to flavor this and have it intense and a nice coating over the top, basically I'm using a couple of ingredients that are Asian in origin. They have an incredible amount of flavor, umami characteristics. And so I want to show you some of the ingredients that I put together so that I can do basically a glaze that will go over the top of this, right? And so I have some red wine concentrating down here. If you have the recipe, you want to try this or you're going to follow along, you want to get your red wine kind of cooking down. And what you have to go into that is a little bit of red miso paste. You can see this deep kind of brick red miso paste. So this is very different than the white miso that you might find for soup or for salad dressings and things like that. This one is much more intense. It's been aged longer. It still goes through the whole fermentation process with soybeans, some salt added to it, some koji to start that whole fermentation process. But it's deep and intense in flavor, nuttiness. It's got the rich kind of a thick texture to it that will create this nice kind of glaze to go over the fish. Another fun ingredient right here, very popular and extremely healthy for you, loaded with tons of antioxidants. That is actually black garlic. So it's fermented black garlic. You can find this probably online. If you look, you might find some specialty stores for both of these products because they are a little bit hard to find. But don't let that scare you away, because once you have them, you keep in your pantry. They're great things to have at all times. Intense flavor. You can tell from the regular color of garlic when it's fresh versus this garlic that goes through fermentation and then a slow dry aging over very low heat to the point where it just kind of caramelizes naturally. There's Maillard reaction that happens there. It's an enzymatic browning process that happens, and it changes the texture and the complexity and the depth of flavor in that. So it doesn't taste anything like fresh raw garlic. It tastes much more like an intense, nutty, kind of fudgy type of a garlic. It's brown, it tastes intensely sweet, and it's a great combination, I think, to go with this into our red wine that's cooking down. I do have some fresh ginger. You can tell some wonderful ginger root that I kind of grated, and then also some scallions out of our garden. So the green onion in there adds a lot of nice aromatics to it. So what I have, by the way, I've preheated my oven up to about 400 degrees because I'm going to cook it fairly quickly. You can see that I've got some of the red wine kind of cooking down slowly and softly. I don't want it to boil away too much to the point where it might scorch and burn. And so what I have is the red wine reducing down along with the green onions and that the black garlic, which I kind of just chopped up. So these cloves of garlic are very soft and kind of sticky. And so what I'm doing is kind of steeping it in there along with the green onions, the ginger, and kind of reducing that down, not too high a temperature, a nice little simmer. And it's going to concentrate down from, let's say if you're doing by recipe a cup, it's going to go down to about a quarter to maybe even an eighth of a cup. And it will soften, it will get all of those flavors to kind of perfume and bloom. And you'll pick up a lot of that intensity of flavor. So that's where your depth of flavor comes from. You're also using the red wine in here as kind of a bridge ingredient. You already have your red wine in the glass. You can use the red wine here. So when you go to take a sip of it and you have it in your glass, you already have that flavor, familiar flavor in your mouth. There we go. So now we're about at the right temperature and reduction on that. So now what I'm going to do is go ahead and put in probably about 3 tablespoons of the red miso. This might be just a little bit extra, but we're going to put our red miso in there and then we'll just whisk it and stir it all around. I don't want to really cook the miso for too long of a time here. It is possible to kind of lose all that wonderful characteristic that's been brought by that miso paste. There's a lot of different colors and types of miso, but I'm happen to be using this red miso because of its intensity. Now, it does have a good amount of sodium and salt in there, but it also has umami. It also has an incredible amount of flavor. And so now that I've got that miso paste in there with the black garlic paste, which is softened, and the green onions and the ginger, I'm also going to finish with just a little bit of soy sauce. It doesn't take much because there is already a pretty good amount of sodium in there. And then to balance it out, to kind of cut through some of that intensity of umami, I'm going to add a couple tablespoons worth of some red wine vinegar. I could also add some lemon juice to it afterwards if I wanted to. And basically, I'm just going to kind of stir it all around. So that kind of reliquefies it just a little bit. And from here, typically what I want to do is kind of blend it, get some of the chunks to really break up so it's a smooth kind of a paste that I can spread over the top of that salmon as a nice little crust. So if you have yours looking like this, you can tell that wonderful color from the garlic and that red wine has that deep, deep kind of intensity. If you happen to have a stick blender, these are very popular. You could use like a stick blender or a motion blender. You could also, if you needed to, and your batch was big enough, you could put it into like a food processor and just kind of pulse blend it a bit until it's smooth. And even if you wanted to, you could strain it through a wire mesh strainer so you get the chunky bits out of there as well. And then from there, you're all set, essentially. It's got acid, it's got intensity of salt and the umami characteristic in there. All the flavors are really wonderful, and it should be a nice topping to go onto your fish in this case here. You could use it for other things as well. Keep it cold, refrigerated, put plastic wrap on it, and it should last you a pretty good long time in the refrigerator. You could even freeze it and then thaw it out afterwards if you wanted to. This might actually even be a really nice topping to go on a piece of beef or a steak or something like that.
Oh, great idea, Todd.
Yeah.
I love that you can make that in advance and be all prepped for when
and so it's
arrive.
incredibly flavorful. It's got red wine already in it, and it's got this depth of flavor that's really kind of interesting. If you've never had a miso cooked in that way or black garlic, I urge you to give it a try because it's really, really a fun ingredient. So here I have a batch that's already cooled down so I can put it onto the fish, and it's also strained out fairly smooth. So I went through that blending process, and I have some that's already done right here. And so a little bit of it goes a long way, but I am going to put it onto the fish. And again, my oven is preheated up to about 400 degrees. And what I want to do is take a nice piece of this fish here. You can see that it's already deboned. There's no pin bones that run down the middle here. And the skin has been removed underneath there. And it's basically boneless and skinless. So it's a nice sockeye fillet that I was lucky enough to find. They have had a little bit of a rough season where they're opening and closing the salmon season up in Copper River, but I wanted to show that off. And so I'm going to take one piece here. And of course, your salmon may look a little bit different from the thickness or the size. It may or may not be Copper River. As long as it's sustainable, I think that's a great thing. And so just a little bit on top. And I'm going to spread it like a paste. You can, of course, it would be better if you can allow this to marinate for maybe up to 2 hours or so. It'll start to permeate into the flesh.
Do you do that in the fridge or on the countertop?
I would do it in the refrigerator. Yeah. You don't need to, especially as thin as this one is, you wouldn't need to temper it to room temp that much just because of how thin this one is. If yours is a little thicker, you could leave it out at room temperature for sure. Because you know you're going to cook it fairly soon.
Yeah.
All right, so a nice coating on there, just enough. Gives it a nice kind of a glaze. And as I go into that hot oven, it's going to cook fairly quickly. It won't take very long. Depending on how you like your salmon done, it might be a little bit on the sides. You'll see just a little bit of the undercolor there for a nice medium rare. If you wanted a little more done to medium, just let it go a little bit longer. But the nice part is with that hot oven and 400 degrees, you're going to get a little intensity and a little browning over the top of that beautiful deep dark kind of a crust on top there. So I'm going to go ahead and pop that into the oven. I'll check it maybe in about 5 minutes and see how it's looking from there.
So you had suggested that we could do this on some red meat, this miso sauce as well. What about, Todd, mushrooms? You're always doing fantastic mushrooms. Would that be just too much with the mushroom?
Well, it would be definitely an umami bomb, and I would love it. I happen to have some maitake mushrooms, and I was thinking about even putting that on there. It would be such an incredible flavor bomb. I think it would work really well if you were to just brush that over maybe some of those trumpet royale mushrooms, the big ones, the meaty ones. You had some of those, you can just toss it into it. You might even be able to take some of that mixture and put it in with some more vinegar or some lemon juice and maybe a little bit of oil, like a canola oil, and just make a vinaigrette out of it. So it's a little bit
Oh.
lighter. That might go
Mhm.
really well with the mushrooms. So if you wanted to try something like that, you could. I just
Great
put together
idea.
a little bit of a shaved vegetable salad here. If you have cucumbers, obviously that goes really well, nice and refreshing. For me, I would probably start a nice pot of steamed rice along with the flavor profile you have here, and then salmon is one of my absolute favorite things to eat all the time. This is nice and crunchy and refreshing. I happen to have some carrots from the garden, some radishes. Also, there's some fennel in there. So a slight little bit of licorice, sweet licorice, and then some chives. I splashed a little bit again of some rice vinegar in there to give it some acid, be kind of like a nice little palate cleanser and lighten everything up. And then just a tiny pinch of salt in there. So that's been marinating for just a little bit, kind of like a quick pickle. You could do any vegetable you wanted there for this. You know, if you had any springtime vegetable or early summer vegetables coming out, whatever you wanted to serve with it. Sugar snap peas, snow peas are fantastic. Any of those vegetables will go well. And then if you wanted extra sides, you know, rice always goes fantastic, whether it's fried rice or steamed bowl of steamed rice would be great. So now,
question online. Have you ever used this process on a whole salmon?
On a whole side, I have not, but you could easily do that. Yeah. So if you had a whole salmon fillet where it's open, so you could put it on the meat, you could definitely do that. I wouldn't necessarily put it on the skin on the outside of a whole entire fish, but maybe if it were butterflied open, that might be a really cool thing to do.
Oh, beautiful.
Yeah.
Maybe on the barbecue.
Yeah, so super flavorful, and again, a great tie-in to go using those really cool exotic kind of Asian flavors. The black garlic is trending pretty heavily among a lot of the chefs in the industry right now. They're using it in a lot of different ways, from vinaigrettes to caramels and everything like that. So because it's so cooked down, or basically really concentrated and dehydrated to the point where it changes color and turns black like that, it's got intensely concentrated antioxidants. So it's really healthy for you. You might even find it in health food stores if you can't find it around in specialty grocery stores. So I happen to have, of course, with my Zoom oven, I went ahead and made up some ahead of time. So I had a nice, beautiful filet. You can see that it's already kind of shellacked and kind of lacquered, nice and dark there. Definitely serve it with a nice lemon wedge to go with it. If you want to garnish or decorate a little bit more with some of your sauce, you most definitely can. It is pretty intense in flavor, so it shouldn't need too much. But if you wanted to put a little bit on, you by all means, you could. Just put a little on the plate.
That's a nice carryover for your rice.
Exactly. That's what I'm always thinking of.
Yeah.
And then with your crunchy vegetables here, and then nice refreshing vinegar, lemon wedge on there, of course. A lot of times umami, too much umami, and especially with Asian cuisine, can be a little bit overpowering for red wines that have tannins. And so a lot of times what you're going to want to do is make sure that you have enough seasoning in the dish itself. So it should be pretty well balanced as far as sodium or salt. And also you want to have acid there, because that's going to be the palate cleanser that kind of resets your palate, your taste buds every single time. So having acid in here, serving a lemon on this, having the red wine acidity concentrated, plus that rice vinegar in there is going to help to balance out some of the concentration of umami that comes from so much of that in the black garlic, as well as the red miso. Okay, there's a nice, beautiful kind of spicy variegated nasturtium leaf from our garden. A few more chives, chive blossoms on top for color and pop. Everything's pretty dark, but you put it on a beautiful plate and you add a little eye-popping garnishes, and it really comes to life. So I hope you give this a try. Let me know. I'd love to hear if you really like this new red wine black garlic miso glaze. Hopefully it works out well for you like I enjoy it. And definitely give it a try with some of our red wines, whether it's the Merlot or the Elu. Give it a good try and see what you think.
It looks delicious, Todd. Any other tips for us for pairing seafood and red wine, bridges that we should be thinking about?
Sure. That is one of the things that I do is try to consider the cooking method, like a lot of times with red wines and seafood, you might want to grill it. You want to do a heavy, flavorful kind of cooking method, or you sear it or crust it. In this case, I've got a crust over the top here. You can use the wine in the actual sauce or the dish or whatever it is in some way, because that's going to help to kind of bridge it to the wine. So it makes it a little bit more wine friendly when we're going to red wine as opposed to white wine. If you happen to have noticed before, I've used a red wine compound butter where I take some of our red wine, concentrate it down with shallots and herbs and some black peppercorns to a syrup, and then whip that into some softened room temperature butter, and then roll it into tube and chill it, plastic wrap it, and I can keep that around. If you have a red wine compound butter like that, you put just one little pat on a piece of salmon, and that's going to help as well, kind of a bridge ingredient. If you're not able to find salmon, you could do it with other fish as well. Even the same kind of preparation, something that's meaty and hearty in texture, a deep sea bass, maybe striped bass, even sturgeon, something like that. You might even try steelhead as it starts to come through season. You can give it a try and see how that might work. The one thing that you might want to watch out for is extremely oily fish like mackerel, anchovies, smelt, anything like that. A lot of times they have too much oil, too much fishy oil, to the point where they kind of clash with the red wines, the big red wines, and the tannins, and they can taste a little bit metallic. So you want a nice rich fish that has a meaty texture. It can still have some of the oil, the richness, those great omega-3s that we're looking for, as long as it's not overly oily. Then you might have to go to a different type of wine.
Awesome. Thank you, Chef. Well, I'm really excited to have Tim Berg on with us as well. He is the founder, along with his wife, Carol, of the Great Alaska Seafood Company, and they serve only wild caught, sustainably fished from the Marine Stewardship Council fish there, and 99.6% of their fish is going direct to consumers. So from their fisher families direct to your family at home, really fresh and really well taken care of and processed super fast. And that we know is essential to great flavor. So Tim Berg, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. It's great to have you. Oh, where are we?
Okay.
There we go.
Can you hear me?
Just got to get you unmuted. There we go.
All right. Well, yeah, it's great to be with you.
It's great. So tell us a little bit about how you and Carol got involved in sustainable fisheries.
Well, we've always had a passion for seafood, and being in Alaska, it just was a natural for us. We started doing fish processing initially just for sport fishermen that were coming to Alaska. But we had a lot of folks that not only like salmon, they like king crab, and they like scallops, and they like spot prawns, and all these other things. So one thing just led to another, and we got involved, with a lot of different fishermen up here in Alaska. So currently, our product lineup would include over 90 items of different seafood products, most of which are we get right here in Alaska.
That's fantastic. Now, tell us a little bit about the Marine Stewardship Council certification.
Well, that was founded to ensure that certain fisheries are not overfished, and that all started when the East Coast cod fishery out of Cape Cod got shut down because they were overfished. And so the council was formed to ensure that we protect all of our wild fisheries. And in Alaska, we've taken that very serious, to the point where we have a lot of biologists, we have a lot of technology monitoring every fishery. So every fishery in Alaska kind of stands on its own merits, and it's it's watched for sustainability, which means we can't overfish it. If the brood stocks run low, the fisheries are closed, and that there's a limited amount of fishermen that are allowed into fisheries. And so some of these fisheries are controlled by quotas. So take halibut. for example, there's a certain quota that each fisherman that's involved in the fishery is allowed to take each year. And they can catch those, any time of the year. Well, for about 10 months of the year. So that's why we have fresh halibut now available almost 10 months of the year. Where in the past, even, like in the 70s, that wasn't the case. We had just certain periods where that fishery was open and then it was closed. So on our salmon, each river is monitored. Every river on the Kenai Peninsula, for example, has sonar equipment as well as fish traps. And by utilizing that, the biologists can see how many fish are entering the rivers to spawn. And when they don't have the right numbers, they close the fisheries down. So just as of the last couple of weeks, our Copper River fishery's been shut down numerous times. We just had an opener yesterday, and we're getting fresh fish in today because of that.
So, one of the things that you brought to Alaska was your rapid processing. Do you want to talk about that? Because it really differentiates your company.
Well, what we do is, first off, we have local fishermen that we work with, families, people. These are people that have families here on the Kenai Peninsula, and they're all small independent fishermen. And so the people that we work with, we have guidelines that they have to follow in order for us to purchase their fish, because they have to, when they catch their fish, they have to bleed them on the spot. And at the same time, they have to have slush ice on their boat, and they have to put these fish immediately into slush ice. What slush ice is like a slurry ice. So when the fish go in there, they don't get bruised, because if you just have ice, ice can actually bruise fish. But these fish actually have to be floating in ice, which is very, very extremely cold. So on top of that, the fish also have to be delivered to us the same day they're caught. And then at our plant, we only buy the amount of fish that we can actually, that we can. Sorry, that was a fisherman calling us with fish. So we only buy the amount of fish that we can process in that day. So, and that's the thing, we get calls all during the day and night when people have fish and they're wanting to deliver their catch. So, and then, so once we get those fish in, we process them the same day. We have automated, we're a small company, but we have a lot of technology and a lot of automation. So we have fillet machines. So these machines will fillet 25 salmon a minute. And then from there, they go into a machine that removes the bones. So these machines are like from Norway, remove about 95 to 98% of the pin bones in the fish. And then, right after that, they're moved to our vac packing station, and where we have a big conveyor belt vac packing machine, which will vac pack about 40 packages a minute. And then they're rushed into our blast freezer, which is it's minus 60 degrees. And, salmon that are frozen, when you go to, they're only as good as when they went in the packaging. So, a lot of frozen salmon in Alaska is not frozen until 3 or 4 days after it's actually caught. And our fish are, our target is 24 hours. And that's something that we do very well. So we're very proud of our flash frozen product.
Well, and that freezing is super important to the flavor quality, not just from the freshness of when it goes in, but also to when you go to defrost it. Any tips for us on defrosting and ensuring we're having the most delicious salmon on our table?
Yeah, I think my practice is to take the salmon out the night before, and I'll generally just puncture the vacuum seal on the bag, and then I'll let it defrost in the refrigerator. But you can also do a quick defrost by just having a bowl of cold water in your sink, leave the cold water running, and put your packages of salmon in there. You don't have to puncture them, and they'll defrost in about a half an hour, and then they're ready to go.
You're ready to go. But that cold water and running water is pretty essential there too. And you're a Napa native, Tim.
Yeah,
I'm just a little curious what your wine.
Yeah, I was born and raised. I didn't quite get your question there, but
Sorry.
I was born and raised in Napa. Went to school with a lot of the people involved in the wine industry to this day. Went to Justin and graduated in 1972. So got to see Napa when the wine industry was in its infancy.
Well, and you have been very good about giving back to Napa Valley. The first time we met was a donation to hospice for a fantastic charity auction event with amazing, great Alaska seafood. And you also, if any of our friends want to order from you, you do offer shipping included on 8 pounds or more, which is a great opportunity to stock your freezer with some wonderful fresh Alaskan seafood. So do check out your website. I think we posted it up here on the chat. It's quite amazing. And we appreciate you ensuring that your fishermen are farming sustainably, bringing some beautiful products. So thank you for that, and thanks for joining us today. But do tell us what your favorite wine is with your sustainable seafood, your favorite varietal.
Well, when it comes to the salmon, if we're going to have red wine, we love Merlot and also a Pinot, but we do a lot of cedar plank cooking up here. It's kind of our favorite. Putting it right on the barbecue on a nice fresh cedar plank with just olive oil and a good salmon rub on it, and getting the fire real hot and getting that cedar plank actually kind of burning and pulling it off. And, I think a Merlot is a perfect combination with that.
Oh, excellent choice. Well, thank you so much for taking time to join us today. Really appreciate it, and hope to be ordering a little nice sustainable seafood from Alaska for my freezer here pretty soon. So thank you for that. Any questions from anybody for Tim or Chef or anybody else? I know we had a couple things online that I pulled out that Misty pulled from Facebook, but if not, thank you all so much for joining us. We look forward to grilling with you and the thrill of the grill just in time for the 4th of July, and seeing you again soon. And until then, be well, be kind, and cheers. We'll see you all soon. Come visit.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers, everyone. Thank you. Thanks,
Cheers.
Tim.
Sure, Tim, I like that.
Thank you, Tim.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Tim. Thanks, everybody. See you soon.
Thank you, everyone.